No one in the entire Blackwood Kingdom would dare to sleep in the Alpha King's bed, except the one Omega who had absolutely no idea whose bed it was. For years, everyone inside Blackwood Castle understood one simple rule. The private chamber of Alpha King Damian Blackwood was not a place where anyone entered freely. Servants lowered their voices when passing through the royal wing. Guards stood a little straighter near its doors. Even respected wolves from noble families waited for permission before stepping inside. Not because Damian was cruel, not because people hated him, but because he was the Alpha King, a man who carried the responsibility of an entire kingdom and rarely allowed anyone close enough to see the person behind the crown. His chamber was the only place in the enormous castle where he could stop being a symbol. The only place where he could put aside expectations, silence the noise of royal duties, and simply be Damian. Which was exactly why what happened that evening became the most unexpected accident Blackwood Castle had ever seen. Avery Collins never intended to break a royal rule. She never wanted attention. She never dreamed of becoming the Omega everyone would whisper about. And she certainly never imagined she would become the girl who accidentally fell asleep in the most forbidden bed in the kingdom. That morning began like any other day. Avery tied back her soft hair, put on her simple work uniform, and started her duties before most of the castle had even awakened. She was part of the housekeeping staff, one of the Omegas who worked quietly behind the scenes to keep the castle running. She cleaned rooms, arranged fresh linens, prepared fireplaces, and made forgotten spaces feel alive again. Some people considered those tasks small. Avery never did. She believed comfort mattered. She believed kindness could exist even in things nobody noticed. That was simply who she was. Gentle, hardworking, a little clumsy at times, but always genuine. She was the kind of person who would apologize to a chair after accidentally bumping into it, then look around hoping nobody saw. She never chased crowns. She never imagined herself surrounded by luxury. The world of royal meetings, powerful bloodlines, and ancient traditions felt impossibly far away from her normal life. Then one unexpected assignment changed everything. A senior housekeeper responsible for the restricted royal wing became unavailable, and someone reliable was needed to prepare an important room before its owner returned. Avery was chosen. For a moment, she honestly thought she misheard. "Me?" she asked, looking behind her as if there might be another Avery standing nearby. The supervisor smiled. "Yes, you. You notice details other people miss. Just prepare the room exactly as instructed. The owner returns tonight." Avery nodded quickly. She did not ask who the owner was. She did not think she needed to know. A room was a room. A job was a job. At least, that was what she believed before she opened those doors. When Avery reached the royal wing, she immediately noticed the difference. The usual sounds of the busy castle slowly disappeared behind her. The hallway was peaceful, almost untouched by the rush of everyday life. She carefully pushed open the heavy wooden doors and froze. For several seconds, she simply stood there. "Okay," she whispered softly. Definitely not a normal room. The chamber before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall windows reached toward the ceiling, letting soft light fall across the polished floor. Old books filled carefully arranged shelves. A quiet fireplace warmed the space. And in the center stood a large walnut wood bed, perfectly prepared with simple but elegant details. But the strangest thing was not the beauty of the room. It was actually the opposite. For someone powerful enough to own anything he wanted, the owner had chosen surprisingly little. There were no unnecessary treasures. No displays meant to impress visitors. No cold reminder of authority. Only books, warmth, silence. Whoever lived here did not seem like someone trying to prove his power. He seemed like someone searching for a place to rest from it. Avery tilted her head slightly, confused by her own thoughts. "Why am I guessing the personality of someone I've never met?" she whispered, shaking her head with a small, embarrassed smile. She returned to her work before her imagination could create an entire story about a stranger. But even as she cleaned, she could not ignore the strange feeling surrounding her. This place was unfamiliar, yet somehow it felt safe. Not because it was expensive, not because it belonged to someone important. Something about it simply made her feel like she could breathe. Like after spending so much time taking care of everyone else's comfort, she had accidentally found a place that offered some comfort back. "Stop being dramatic, Avery," she quietly told herself. "You're here to change sheets, not have a life-changing moment with furniture. She laughed softly at her own joke and continued working. But when she reached the large walnut bed and began replacing the linens, she paused. A faint scent lingered there. Gentle, almost hidden. Cedarwood, warm smoke, a trace of worn leather. It reminded her of quiet forests after rain and peaceful evenings beside a fireplace. Strong, but strangely comforting. Avery closed her eyes for only a moment. She did not know it belonged to Damian Blackwood. She did not know anything about the man who slept there. She only knew that after a long week of early mornings and late nights, this was the first place where her tired mind finally became quiet. She looked at the perfectly made bed and sighed. Absolutely not, she whispered to herself. Imagine falling asleep here. That would probably be the fastest way to lose my job. She smiled at the ridiculous thought. Then she sat carefully on the edge. Just for a second. Just enough to rest her feet before finishing the final details. At least, that was the plan. But the room was warm. The fire was gentle. The quiet wrapped around her like permission to finally stop moving. Slowly, without realizing it, Avery rested her head against the pillow. The Omega who spent every day taking care of everyone else finally allowed herself one peaceful moment. And before she understood the mistake she had just made, Avery Collins peacefully fell asleep in the one place every wolf in the kingdom respected too much to touch, the Alpha King's bed. The silence inside the royal chamber lasted longer than Avery ever intended. Outside the tall windows, daylight slowly faded, and the warm colors of evening covered Blackwood Castle. The busy sounds of servants finishing their duties disappeared little by little until the royal wing returned to its usual quiet state. The room that was supposed to be perfectly prepared for the Alpha King's return was finished exactly as requested. The fireplace was steady. The shelves were organized. The fresh linens were arranged. There was only one unexpected detail remaining. The Omega responsible for preparing everything was peacefully asleep in the center of it all. Avery had no idea how much time had passed. She did not hear the footsteps approaching the door. She did not notice when the guards outside immediately straightened their posture. She did not feel the entire atmosphere shift as Alpha King Damian Blackwood finally returned to the one place in the castle that belonged only to him. Damian entered the room expecting silence. After a long day filled with decisions, meetings, and responsibilities, silence was the one thing he always found waiting. People believed being king meant having everything. They rarely understood that sometimes having everything meant never knowing if anyone saw the person beneath the title. The moment Damian stepped inside, however, he stopped. Something was different. His sharp eyes moved across the room. Everything was exactly where it should be. The books, the fireplace, the furniture. Then his gaze reached the bed. And for the first time in a very long time, the Alpha King had absolutely no idea what to say. There was an Omega sleeping in his bed, not standing nervously waiting for him, not bowing, not trying to impress him, sleeping, peacefully, comfortably, as if she had found the safest place in the entire world. Damian stared for several seconds, trying to understand the impossible scene in front of him. Nobody entered his private space without permission. Even the highest-ranking members of the kingdom respected that boundary. Yet somehow, this unfamiliar Omega had not only entered his room, but had fallen asleep there like it was the most natural thing in the world. His first reaction should have been frustration. He knew that. The Alpha King inside him immediately listed every rule that had been broken. But the man behind the title remained strangely quiet. Because Avery did not look like someone trying to take advantage of anything. She looked exhausted. She looked peaceful. She looked like someone who had spent so much time caring for others that she accidentally forgot to care for herself. Damian slowly walked closer, intending only to wake her and ask for an explanation. That was the logical thing to do, the responsible thing to do. Yet when he reached the side of the bed, he stopped again. Under the soft glow of the fireplace, he noticed the calm expression on her face. No fear, no carefully practiced respect, no nervous attempt to please the Alpha King. Of course there was not. She did not even know he was standing there. And strangely, that was exactly what caught his attention. For years, every person around Damian measured their actions. They lowered their eyes. They chose their words carefully. They saw the crown before they saw him. It was necessary. He understood that. A king needed respect. But somewhere along the way, Damian had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist around someone. Then this Omega appeared and did something nobody else dared to do. She treated his room, the one place everyone feared disturbing, as somewhere safe enough to rest. A quiet feeling moved through him. Familiar, but almost forgotten. Peace. Deep inside, the wolf instinct that was part of Damian himself seemed almost amused by the situation. Not another voice. Not another being. Just the honest part of him that noticed the truth he tried to ignore. The entire kingdom is careful around you, yet she walked into your world and felt safe enough to fall asleep. Damian narrowed his eyes slightly, almost annoyed at his own thoughts. That was ridiculous. She was a maid who accidentally fell asleep while working. Nothing more. He was simply surprised. That was all. But then he looked down and realized he had been standing there watching her sleep instead of waking her up. His expression immediately returned to its usual seriousness. "This is unbelievable," he muttered quietly. "She enters my room, falls asleep in my bed, and somehow I am the one standing here hesitating." The honest instinct inside him did not need to answer. The truth was already embarrassing enough. Damian exhaled softly and looked away. "It is all her fault." The words sounded firm, almost convincing. Almost. Then a few seconds later, the same Alpha King who blamed her noticed the blanket had slipped slightly from her shoulder. He looked at it, then at the door, then back at Avery. A long silence followed. Finally, with the seriousness of someone making an important royal decision, Damian reached down and gently adjusted the blanket so she would stay warm. Immediately afterward, he frowned at himself. Only because having a sick staff member tomorrow would create more problems, he quietly reasoned. It sounded practical, responsible, exactly like something an Alpha King would say. The only problem was that a part of him already knew it was not the entire truth. For the first time in years, his room did not feel empty when he returned. For the first time in years, someone had brought warmth into his world without even trying. Damian looked at the sleeping Omega one final time, still completely unaware that she had just confused the most powerful wolf in the kingdom simply by being herself. He shook his head slightly, fighting back the smallest hint of a smile. "Definitely her fault," he whispered again. But this time, the words sounded much less like blame. Morning arrived quietly inside the royal chamber, carrying soft sunlight through the tall windows of Blackwood Castle. For a few peaceful seconds, Avery Collins forgot everything. She only noticed how warm the room felt, how comfortable the pillow was, how, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had slept without waking up worried about unfinished work or another responsibility waiting for her. Then her eyes opened completely. The unfamiliar ceiling above her immediately brought every memory back. The royal wing, the special assignment, the beautiful room she was supposed to prepare, the bed she promised herself she would only rest on for 1 second. Avery sat up so quickly she nearly tangled herself in the blanket. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, looking around in panic. She had fallen asleep. Not for a minute. Not for a short break. The entire night. The realization alone was already terrible. Then the door opened. Avery froze. Standing there was the man every person in the kingdom recognized immediately. Alpha King Damian Blackwood. Tall, calm, and carrying the kind of presence that explained why even the busiest rooms became quiet when he entered. Avery had heard countless stories about him. The powerful king. The serious ruler. The alpha who never allowed distractions. And she had just spent the night sleeping in his bed. "I can explain," Avery said immediately, then paused because she realized she had no explanation that sounded reasonable. "Actually, I cannot explain it well, but I promise I was not trying to do anything disrespectful." Damian raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Unfortunately, his silence only made Avery more nervous. "I was assigned to clean this room because someone else was unavailable. I changed the sheets, finished most of the work, and then I sat down for what was supposed to be a few seconds. Which was clearly not a few seconds because now it is morning, and I am still here, and I understand that sounds terrible when I say it out loud." Damian watched as the Omega somehow explained, apologized, and judged herself all at the same time. He had planned to question her seriously. He had prepared himself to act exactly as an Alpha King should. But Avery was making it surprisingly difficult. She was not making excuses. She was not trying to use the situation for attention. She looked genuinely horrified by her own mistake. "Please do not blame the housekeeping team," she continued quickly. "They trusted me with this responsibility. This was completely my fault. That sentence caught Damian's attention. My fault. Strange. Last night, he had said almost the same thing about her. Except when he said it, he had been trying to convince himself. When Avery said it, she truly meant it. Damian crossed his arms, returning to the serious expression everyone expected from him. You understand that nobody is allowed to use this room without permission. Avery nodded immediately. Yes, Alpha. And you understand that falling asleep in the Alpha King's bed is not exactly included in normal housekeeping duties. Her face filled with embarrassment. Yes, Alpha. That part was definitely not in my instructions. A brief silence followed. And for one dangerous second, Damian almost smiled. Almost. He caught himself immediately. This was exactly the problem. She had broken one of the most important boundaries in the castle, yet somehow he was the one struggling to stay serious. The honest instinct deep within him quietly recognized what he refused to admit. He was not searching for a punishment. He was searching for a reason not to give one. Damian ignored the thought. She broke a rule. That was the fact. Of course, that same rule breaker was also the person he covered with a blanket last night instead of waking up. Another inconvenient fact. He looked away briefly, annoyed by his own contradiction. Finally, he made his decision. Avery Collins. She straightened immediately. Yes, Alpha. Since this happened while you were responsible for maintaining my chamber, you will continue that responsibility until I decide otherwise. Avery blinked. Continue. Correct. She looked confused. So, my punishment is cleaning the room I was already supposed to clean? Damian paused. When she said it that way, it sounded much less like a punishment. Your punishment is proving that yesterday was only a mistake and that I can trust you not to repeat it. Avery thought about it carefully. So I should continue doing my job properly. Another silence. The logical part of Damian realized she had a point. The Alpha King part of him refused to admit it. Exactly. Avery slowly nodded. That is a very fair punishment. Damian maintained his serious expression, but the quiet instinct within him seemed almost amused. The most powerful wolf in the kingdom had somehow created a punishment that kept the person who disturbed his peace closer to him. Damian turned toward the window, hiding the smallest change in his expression. He told himself it was only because Avery was a hard-working servant who deserved a second chance. Nothing more. But somewhere deep inside, the most honest part of him already knew the truth. For the first time in years, he was not ready for his room to feel empty again. The following days proved something Damian Blackwood did not expect. Avery Collins was very good at following instructions. Almost too good. After being given permission to continue maintaining his chamber, Avery treated the responsibility as if the future of the entire kingdom depended on perfectly arranged pillows and dust-free bookshelves. She arrived exactly on time. She checked every detail twice, sometimes 3 times. And most noticeably, she avoided standing anywhere near the bed. Damian noticed it on the second day. He was reviewing documents near the fireplace when Avery carefully walked around the room, leaving a strangely large amount of distance between herself and the place where the entire accident started. At first, he ignored it. Then he noticed her do it again and again. Finally, curiosity won. Avery. She immediately turned. Yes, Alpha. He looked toward the other side of the room. Is there a reason you are walking around my bed like it is dangerous? Avery froze. No. A short silence followed. Damian raised an eyebrow. That answer sounded very convincing. She sighed softly, realizing he did not believe her at all. I just think it is safer if I keep a respectful distance. From the bed. From accidentally making history twice. Damian stared at her. For a moment, the serious Alpha King had no response. Avery quickly added, once is an accident. Twice would be extremely difficult to explain. He looked away, but not before she almost caught the smallest hint of amusement on his face. That was becoming a problem. Avery Collins had a strange ability to make him forget he was supposed to be intimidating. Over the next several days, Damian started noticing more things he never intended to notice. Avery quietly hummed when she organized shelves. She talked to the fireplace when the wood refused to burn properly, as if polite encouragement would somehow convince it to cooperate. She remembered exactly where every item belonged, yet somehow forgot to take breaks for herself. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon, he returned earlier than expected and found Avery still working after everyone else had finished. "Do you always ignore rest?" he asked. Avery looked surprised. "I do rest." Damian glanced around. When she opened her mouth, then paused. Apparently, she needed more time than expected to find an answer. That told him everything. The next morning, Avery found her workload mysteriously reduced. A few of the heavier tasks had already been reassigned. A cup of warm tea appeared near the area where she usually worked. She assumed another servant left it there. Damian allowed her to believe that. After all, he was not doing anything unusual. At least, that was what he told himself. He was simply making sure a member of his staff stayed healthy. A tired worker made mistakes. Mistakes created problems. It was completely logical. The honest instinct within him, the part of Damian that saw through every excuse he created, seemed far less convinced. Strange. For someone who claimed she caused problems, he was spending a lot of time preventing hers. Damian ignored the thought immediately. She already caused enough trouble once, he quietly reasoned. I am only avoiding another incident. Yet even he knew that explanation became weaker every day. Because Avery was not creating chaos. She was creating something else. The room that once existed only as a place for him to sleep slowly started feeling different. The books she organized actually looked used again. The fireplace was warmer. Small details he never cared about before suddenly became noticeable. But the biggest change was not the room. It was him. Damian Blackwood, the Alpha King known for staying focused through anything, now found himself recognizing the sound of Avery's footsteps outside the door. He noticed when she was quieter than usual. He noticed when she smiled because of something small. And every single time, he created another explanation. Responsibility, curiosity, habit, anything except the obvious answer. Then one evening, Avery finished her work and smiled proudly at the room. There. No accidents today. Damian looked up from his book. Congratulations. You successfully avoided sleeping at work. She laughed softly. A real laugh. Not the careful, polite laugh most people gave him because he was king. And unexpectedly, Damian found himself wanting to hear it again. That realization made him immediately look back at his book. The words on the page suddenly became very interesting. Or at least he pretended they were. Deep down, the most honest part of him already knew the truth. Avery Collins had not just entered his room by accident. She had entered his quiet, carefully controlled world. And somehow, without even trying, she was starting to change it. Little by little, without anyone noticing exactly when it started, Avery Collins became part of Damian Blackwood's daily life. At first, she was simply the Omega responsible for maintaining his chamber. She arrived, completed her work, and left everything exactly where it belonged. That was how it was supposed to remain. Simple, professional, predictable. 3 things Damian usually appreciated. Except nothing involving Avery stayed predictable for very long. Before she arrived, Damian's days followed the same perfect pattern. He woke before sunrise, reviewed reports, attended meetings, solved problems, returned to his quiet room, then repeated everything again the next day. It was efficient. It was controlled. It was exactly what people expected from an Alpha King. It was also incredibly lonely, although Damian would never have described it that way. Then Avery happened. She did not change his world with grand gestures. She changed it with small things he did not realize he noticed until they were already part of his routine. The quiet sound of her humming while organizing the shelves. The way she adjusted the fireplace because she believed even a royal room should feel welcoming. The way she talked to objects when they annoyed her. One morning, Damian walked in just in time to hear Avery speaking seriously to a stack of books. Please cooperate. You belong on this shelf. I believe in you. Damian stopped at the doorway. Are you encouraging my books? Avery turned around quickly. For a second, she looked embarrassed. Then she looked back at the books. Maybe. Why, he asked. Because they looked like they needed support. Damian stared at her. They are books. Avery nodded. Very stubborn books. For several seconds, the Alpha King had no response. That was becoming a familiar problem around Avery. She said things nobody else would dare to say, not because she wanted attention, but because she simply saw the world differently. Everyone else entered his room, carefully remembering he was a king. Avery entered remembering it was still a place where someone lived. And somehow, that difference mattered. As days passed, she became more comfortable around him. She still respected him. She still called him Alpha. But she was no longer afraid of every word she spoke. One evening, While Damian sat surrounded by documents, Avery looked at the endless stacks of papers on his desk and frowned slightly. "Can I ask something?" she said. Damian looked up. "You usually do." She paused. "Is that a complaint?" "An observation." Avery considered that acceptable and continued. "Do you ever actually rest?" The question surprised him more than it should have. Many people asked Damian what he needed. Many asked what decisions he would make. Many asked how he would protect the kingdom. Almost nobody asked if he was taking care of himself. "I rest enough," he answered. Avery glanced at the mountain of paperwork, then back at him. She clearly did not believe him. Damian raised an eyebrow. "You disagree?" "I did not say anything. Your expression did." Avery immediately tried to fix her face into a more neutral look, which somehow made it even more obvious. Damian looked away before she could notice his amusement. The honest instinct within him, the part of himself he could never completely silence, recognized something before he wanted to admit it. He liked this. Not because she ignored who he was. She understood exactly who he was. She simply remembered there was more to him than a title. Later that week, Damian discovered something new sitting among his usual books. It was not about leadership, not about history, not about kingdom responsibilities. It was a simple adventure story. He immediately knew who placed it there. When Avery arrived, he held up the book. "Explain." She looked at it and smiled. "It is a book. I am aware." Then I explained perfectly. Damian gave her a patient look. Avery laughed softly before answering. "Everything you read is about solving problems. I thought maybe you should have one book that does not require saving an entire kingdom." He should have told her that was unnecessary. He should have reminded her that his schedule existed for a reason. Instead, later that night, Damian read the first chapter, only because he wanted to understand why she recommended it. That was his explanation. A very reasonable explanation. The quiet, honest part of him seemed unconvinced. For someone who claimed Avery disrupted his routine, he was becoming very interested in everything she added to it. Damian closed the book and sighed. "She is making my peaceful life complicated." But even as he said it, he knew something had changed. His life before Avery had been peaceful because nothing disturbed it. Now it felt peaceful because something finally warmed it. Then, one afternoon, Avery made a small comment about how even the Alpha King apparently needed a book recommendation from a housekeeper to learn how to relax. And before Damian could stop himself, he laughed. Not a polite smile. Not the controlled expression people expected from a ruler. A real laugh. For a moment, the entire room became still. Because everyone nearby realized the same thing. They could not remember the last time they heard Alpha King Damian Blackwood laugh like that. The sound of Damian Blackwood's laughter did not stay a secret for long. In a castle where everyone was used to quiet halls, serious conversations, and perfectly followed traditions, something as simple as the Alpha King laughing naturally became the most interesting event of the week. Nobody said anything directly to Damian, of course. They respected him too much for that. But people noticed. The guards noticed that the Alpha King no longer walked back to his chamber looking like he was carrying the entire world alone. The servants noticed the royal wing somehow felt warmer than before. Even the advisors noticed that Damian seemed a little more patient during long meetings. The strange part was that everyone seemed to understand the reason except Damian himself. Whenever someone mentioned the change, he immediately denied it. "Nothing has changed," he said calmly. "Avery is simply doing her job." It was a perfectly reasonable statement. At least, Damian believed it was. Unfortunately, the evidence around him disagreed. Because while saying nothing had changed, he was sitting beside the fireplace Avery convinced him to use more often. He was drinking the tea she recommended after telling him he worked too late. And on the table beside him was the adventure book she had placed there, now halfway finished. The honest instinct deep within him did not need to argue. The facts were already doing that. Damian looked at the book, then at the tea, then sighed quietly. Coincidence, he told himself. Even he did not sound completely convinced. But that was the strange thing about Avery Collins. She never tried to change him. She never walked into his life and told him he was wrong. She simply treated him like someone who deserved the same kindness he gave everyone else. And somehow, that affected him more than any grand gesture ever could. One evening, while Avery was organizing the room, she noticed Damian standing near the window, looking over the castle grounds. The expression on his face was the one everyone else knew. Calm. Controlled. The expression of an Alpha King. But Avery had spent enough time around him to recognize something others missed. Sometimes the quietest people carried the most thoughts. "Can I ask something?" she said gently. Damian looked over his shoulder. "You usually do." Avery smiled slightly. "You keep saying that, but you always answer." He paused. She was right. Another slightly inconvenient observation. "What is your question?" he asked. Avery looked around the room before answering. "Why do you spend so much time alone?" Most people would never ask him something so direct. But Avery did not ask because she was curious about the Alpha King. She asked because she cared about Damian. That difference was why he answered. Not completely, not everything, but more than he usually allowed. "When people depend on you, distance becomes easier," he said. "A king has responsibilities before anything else." Avery listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not immediately tell him he was wrong. She simply let him speak. "People come to me when they need answers," Damian continued. "When they need decisions. When they need strength." For a moment, the room became silent. Then Avery softly said, "That sounds lonely." Such a simple sentence. No dramatic reaction. No pity. No attempt to fix him. And somehow, it reached him more than anything else could have. Because everyone always admired how strong Damian Blackwood was. Very few people wondered how heavy that strength became. Damian looked at her, surprised by how easily she saw something others overlooked for years. "You have a habit of saying things most people would not," he said. Avery looked slightly worried. "Is that a bad thing?" He thought about it. Before Avery, he probably would have said yes. Now he was not so sure. "No," he finally answered. "I do not think it is." Her smile returned, and Damian immediately noticed. Which was another problem. He was noticing far too many things. The way she smiled. The way the room felt different when she was there. The way silence no longer felt peaceful when it meant she was gone. Later that night, after Avery left, Damian looked around his chamber. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Yet somehow, everything had changed. He had spent years building a life where nothing could distract him. Then one Omega accidentally fell asleep in his bed and somehow became the one person who made everything feel different. Damian shook his head slightly, still refusing to fully admit what was happening. "It is all her fault," he whispered. But this time, there was no frustration behind the words. Because deep down, the most honest part of him already understood something he was not ready to say. Avery Collins was not ruining his peaceful life. She was showing him that maybe it had never truly been peaceful before. And while everyone in Blackwood Castle could see the Alpha King changing, there was still one person who refused to admit it. Damian himself. Everyone inside Blackwood Castle noticed the change long before Damian Blackwood was willing to admit it. To the rest of the kingdom, the Alpha King was still the same powerful and respected leader he had always been. He was still responsible, still focused, still the person everyone trusted when difficult decisions needed to be made. Avery Collins did not remove that part of him. She never tried to. She simply reminded everyone that there was another side of him they had almost forgotten existed. Before Avery, Damian's life was perfectly organized. Every hour had a purpose. Every conversation had a reason. Every day moved exactly according to plan. It was impressive. It was admirable. But it left very little room for anything unexpected. And somehow, the unexpected arrived in the form of one Omega who accidentally fell asleep in his bed and then continued surprising him every day after that. The royal wings slowly changed in ways nobody could ignore. The fireplace that was once rarely used now burned warmly almost every evening. The room that was always silent sometimes carried the sound of quiet conversations. And the Alpha King who used to spend every spare moment working occasionally remembered that taking a break was not a failure. The people closest to Damian noticed most of all. One afternoon, after a meeting ended earlier than expected, one of his trusted advisors looked at him with a knowing expression. "You seem different lately, Alpha." Damian continued reviewing the papers in front of him. Different how? Less like someone carrying the castle alone. Damian paused for a brief moment, then immediately returned to his usual calm expression. "Nothing has changed." The advisor wisely decided not to argue, mostly because the evidence was sitting everywhere around him. The tea beside Damian was the kind Avery recommended. The book resting near his chair was the one Avery suggested. Even his schedule had small spaces for breaks now, because Avery once told him that even kings needed time to breathe. For someone claiming nothing had changed, Damian had kept almost every change she introduced. Later that evening, when he noticed this himself, he frowned slightly. The honest instinct deep within him, the part of himself that noticed every truth he avoided, did not need to say anything. The situation was already obvious. Damian looked around the room. She is simply good at her responsibilities, he reasoned quietly. That was true. Avery was responsible. She worked hard. She cared about details. But that explanation did not answer why he noticed when she looked tired. It did not explain why he remembered exactly how she liked her tea during late work hours. It certainly did not explain why the room felt strangely empty on days when she finished her tasks early and left. She is just part of the routine, Damian added. Even he knew that was becoming a weaker argument. Because Damian Blackwood did not care about routines. He cared about Avery. He simply was not ready to admit the difference. Meanwhile, Avery was discovering something unexpected too. Somewhere between arranging books, preparing the room, and accidentally teaching an Alpha King how to relax, she stopped seeing only the title everyone else saw. She still respected him. She never forgot who he was. But she also noticed things others missed. She noticed how Damian always listened carefully before making decisions. She noticed how much he cared, even when he expressed it quietly. She noticed that the man people called intimidating was often just someone who carried responsibilities without complaining. The Alpha King from the stories and the Damian she saw every day slowly became two very different images. And she liked the real one much more. One night, Damian found the adventure book she gave him placed neatly on the shelf after he finished reading it. He could have removed it. He could have returned everything to exactly how it was before Avery entered his life. But he did not. The quiet instinct inside him already understood the reason. If he truly wanted his old life back, why was he keeping every piece of the new one? Damian had no answer. Because for the first time, the problem was not that Avery Collins had entered his carefully controlled world. The problem was that he no longer wanted to imagine that world without her in it. For a short while, Damian Blackwood believed he could continue pretending everything was normal. The room was warmer. His days felt lighter. Avery Collins had become someone he naturally expected to see, even if he still refused to admit how much that mattered. But outside the peaceful moments they created, the rest of the castle had started noticing something neither of them fully understood yet. People talked. Not with cruelty. Not with anger. Most of the people inside Blackwood Castle respected Avery. They knew she was kind. They knew she worked harder than almost anyone. They saw the way she brought a sense of comfort into places that once felt cold. But old traditions were not always easy to forget. An Alpha King had always been expected to stand beside someone powerful. Someone from an important family. Someone prepared for the weight of royal life. And Avery was still the Omega who spent her days making sure everyone else was comfortable before thinking about herself. One afternoon, while carrying fresh linens through the hallway, Avery accidentally heard a quiet conversation nearby. "She is a good person," one servant admitted. "Nobody can deny that." Another voice answered gently, "Of course she is. But being good and standing beside an Alpha King are two very different things." Avery stopped walking. The words were not meant to hurt her. That almost made them harder to ignore, because they sounded like something she had secretly wondered herself. She looked down at the linens in her arms and smiled sadly. She had never wanted anything from Damian. She never cared about his title. Somewhere along the way, she had simply started enjoying the moments when he was just himself. When he laughed at her strange comments. When he pretended not to care but remembered every little detail. When the Alpha King disappeared for a moment and only Damian remained. But maybe she had forgotten something important. The world would never see him as only Damian. The next day, Damian noticed the difference immediately. Avery arrived exactly on time. The room was cleaned perfectly. The books were arranged correctly. The fireplace was prepared exactly how he liked it. Everything was flawless. And something felt completely wrong. At first, he could not understand why. Then he realized. It was too quiet. Avery was no longer softly humming while she worked. She was not talking to stubborn books. She was not making small comments that somehow challenged him and entertained him at the same time. She was careful, respectful, distant, exactly how everyone else treated him. And he disliked it more than he expected. "Avery," he finally said. She turned politely. "Yes, Alpha." Damian paused. Even that sounded different. Perfectly correct. Perfectly appropriate. Completely unlike her. Is something wrong? He asked. She smiled. No, Alpha. Everything is fine. It was the kind of answer most people gave him. The kind that created distance instead of honesty. And now that Avery was the one saying it, Damian finally understood how empty it felt. You are being unusually quiet. Avery looked surprised. I am only trying to be more professional. Professional. He should have been pleased. That was what he expected from everyone before meeting her. Yet hearing that word from Avery felt like watching the warmth slowly leave the room. I see, Damian said. But he did not see. Not really. Later that evening, after Avery left, he stood alone in his chamber. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly the way an Alpha King's room should be. And somehow, it felt colder than before. The honest instinct deep within him recognized the truth immediately. The room itself had never changed. The expensive furniture, the books, the fireplace, none of those things had created the feeling of home he started to love. Avery had. Damian closed his eyes for a moment, finally facing the thought he avoided for so long. He once believed Avery Collins disrupted his peaceful life. But now that she was trying to disappear from it, he realized something unexpected. He missed every single thing he once called a distraction. Avery Collins became exactly what everyone expected a servant in the royal wing to be. Perfect. She arrived before schedule every morning. She completed every task without needing a single reminder. Every book was returned to the correct shelf. Every detail in the room was carefully prepared. Anyone watching from the outside would have said she was doing an excellent job. And that was exactly what bothered Damian Blackwood the most. Because everything was perfect. Too perfect. The first few days, Damian tried to convince himself that nothing was wrong. Avery was simply taking her responsibilities seriously. That should have been a good thing. After all, before she arrived, this was exactly how his life worked. Quiet. Organized. Predictable. No unexpected conversations. No distractions. No surprises. This was the routine he had spent years creating. So why did it suddenly feel so empty? Avery still greeted him every morning. But instead of her usual warm smile, she gave him the polite expression everyone else used. Good morning, Alpha. She still answered his questions. But instead of honest thoughts, she gave perfect responses. Of course, Alpha. As you wish, Alpha. Everything was respectful. Everything was correct. And Damian hated how much he missed when it was not. He missed hearing her quietly encourage stubborn books to stay on shelves. He missed the way she questioned whether he had eaten or rested without thinking about the fact that most people would never ask an Alpha King something so personal. He even missed the little comments that interrupted his perfectly organized routine. The same things he once called distractions were now the things he looked for first. That realization was extremely inconvenient. One afternoon, Damian watched as Avery arranged the room with flawless precision. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was forgotten. There was absolutely nothing he could criticize. Yet somehow, something important was missing. You finished quickly today, he said. Avery turned with a polite smile. Yes, Alpha. I wanted to make sure I completed everything efficiently. Efficiently. A word Damian normally respected. A word he used often. So why did hearing it from Avery feel wrong? You do not have to rush, he replied. Avery looked slightly surprised. I do not want to waste your time, Alpha. Damian became quiet. His time. Everyone always worried about his time, his responsibilities, his duties. But Avery used to be the one person who forgot all of that for a moment and simply asked about him. Not the Alpha King. Him. The honest instinct deep within him, the part of himself that recognized every truth he tried to avoid, quietly understood what was happening. He finally had the silence he once believed he wanted. So why did he miss the person who interrupted it? Damian had no answer. Because answering meant admitting something he was not ready to face. Later that evening, he sat beside the fireplace and looked around his chamber. The room was exactly like it had been before Avery entered his life. Calm, orderly, quiet. The strange thing was that months ago, this same silence had felt normal. Now it only reminded him of what was missing. The next morning confirmed what he already knew. Avery entered with fresh tea and placed it on the table beside him. She remembered exactly how he preferred everything arranged. She remembered every detail about his routine, but she no longer added herself into it. Thank you, Avery, Damian said. She looked up and smiled. You are welcome, Alpha. It was a nice smile. A respectful smile. The kind of smile she probably gave everyone in the castle. And that was when Damian finally understood why it bothered him. because he knew what Avery's real smile looked like. The one she showed when she laughed at her own silly comments. The one she had when she forgot about titles and simply enjoyed a conversation. The one that made a room feel warmer without her even trying. This was not that smile. And somehow, seeing Avery hide the brightest parts of herself hurt more than any mistake she had ever made. Damian watched as she prepared to leave quietly, exactly like a proper servant should. Exactly like everyone once expected her to be. But he did not want the perfect servant everyone expected. He missed the person who made his books seem less lonely. The person who reminded him to rest. The person who turned a royal chamber into something that finally felt like home. And for the first time, Damian Blackwood understood something he should have realized much earlier. He never missed someone taking care of his room. He missed Avery. For years, Damian Blackwood believed he understood what he needed. Discipline, control, distance. Those things helped him become the Alpha King his kingdom trusted. They allowed him to make difficult choices, protect others, and carry responsibilities that most people never saw. But sitting alone in his perfectly arranged chamber, Damian finally accepted the truth he had spent so long avoiding. None of his explanations made sense anymore. At first, he called it responsibility. Avery Collins was under his protection because she worked in his chamber. That was all. Then he called it curiosity. She was different from everyone else, so naturally he noticed her. Then he called it routine. She had simply become part of his everyday life. Every excuse sounded logical for a while, until Avery stepped back and all those explanations disappeared. Because he did not miss the clean room. He did not miss the organized shelves. He did not miss having someone complete a task. He missed the way she made ordinary moments feel alive. The honest instinct deep within him. The part of Damian that always recognized the truth before he was ready to admit it, was no longer amused by his excuses. This time, there was nothing funny about it. Because the truth was simple. Damian was never afraid that Avery changed his life. He was afraid of how empty it felt when she stopped. The next morning, when Avery finished her duties and prepared to leave quietly like she had done for days, Damian finally spoke. Avery. She stopped immediately. Yes, Alpha. There it was again. The perfect answer. The respectful tone. The careful distance. Everything he once thought he wanted from everyone around him. Everything he no longer wanted from her. Why did you change? He asked. Avery looked surprised. Change? You know what I mean. She looked away for a moment, and Damian waited. He did not command an answer. He did not speak as a king. He simply waited as Damian. Finally, Avery sighed softly. I realized I became too comfortable. Damian frowned slightly. Too comfortable? She nodded. I forgot that this is not just any room. You are not just anyone. You are the Alpha King, and I. She paused, searching for the right words. I did not want to make things harder for you. And suddenly Damian understood. Avery had not pulled away because she stopped caring. She pulled away because she cared too much. She was willing to hide the brightest parts of herself if she believed it would protect him. Somehow, that bothered him even more. Avery, he said gently. Do you know how many people in my life have treated me exactly the way they are supposed to? She did not answer. People respect me. They listen to me. They follow every rule perfectly. He looked around the chamber that once felt like nothing more than a place to rest. I have had perfection around me my entire life. Avery quietly listened. But you were the first person in a long time who walked into this room and saw more than an Alpha King. Her expression softened. Damian. It was the first time in days she had said his name instead of his title. And that small difference meant more than he expected. You asked me if I rested. You questioned my terrible reading habits. You somehow convinced yourself my books needed emotional support. Avery looked embarrassed. I still think they did. For the first time in days, Damian saw a glimpse of the real Avery return. And he smiled. That is exactly my point. She blinked in confusion. What is? You. The room became quiet. I do not need you to become someone who only agrees with me. I already have enough people who do that. I do not need someone who remembers I am a king every second. His voice softened. I need someone who remembers I am still a person. Avery looked at him, and for the first time in days, the careful distance between them disappeared. Damian finally understood that strength was not always about standing alone. Sometimes, true strength was allowing someone to stand close enough to see the parts of yourself the world never noticed. Later that night, after Avery left with her real smile finally returned, Damian stood beside the fireplace. The room felt warm again, not because anything inside it had changed, because she stopped pretending she did not belong there. A small smile appeared on his face as he thought about everything that happened since the day she accidentally entered his life. It is all her fault, he whispered quietly. But this time, there was no denial, no frustration, only a truth he was finally beginning to accept. Avery Collins had changed his world, and Damian Blackwood, the Alpha King who could lead an entire kingdom, was about to learn something completely new. How to open his heart to someone who never asked for it, but somehow earned it anyway. Damian Blackwood had spent most of his life learning how to protect others. He knew how to lead a kingdom. He knew how to make difficult decisions. He knew how to remain calm when everyone around him needed strength. But after finally admitting that Avery Collins mattered to him, Damian discovered something unexpected. Caring about one person was somehow more confusing than carrying the responsibility of thousands. The problem was not that he did not care. It was the opposite. He cared so much that he started treating it like another royal responsibility. And when Damian Blackwood took responsibility for something, he prepared. A lot. The first sign appeared when he decided Avery needed more time to rest. A normal person might simply suggest taking a break. Damian created an entire adjusted schedule designed to balance her duties, free time, and comfort. When Avery saw it, she stared at the paper for several seconds. "Alpha," she said slowly. "Yes. Is this a rest schedule?" "Correct." She looked again. "With different sections?" "Organization improves effectiveness. There is a section called Relaxing Objectives." Damian paused. For the first time, hearing it spoken out loud made it sound slightly unnecessary. "Only slightly. Rest is important," he explained. Avery tried very hard not to smile. "I agree. I just never thought someone could make relaxing look this official." Damian immediately noticed her expression. "You are laughing." "No. You are clearly trying not to." Avery looked away. Maybe a little. And strangely, Damian did not mind. A few months earlier, almost nobody would have dared to tease him about anything. Now this Omega could question his entire approach to resting. And instead of being annoyed, he found himself appreciating her honesty. The quiet instinct deep within him, the part of Damian that always saw through his own excuses, seemed almost amused. He could manage an entire kingdom without hesitation. Yet making Avery smile somehow required more planning than a royal meeting. Damian looked at the schedule again and quietly admitted that maybe it was a little excessive. The next challenge was even more difficult. A gift. Damian wanted to give Avery something meaningful. Not because he needed to prove anything. Not because of status. Simply because he wanted to see her happy. Unfortunately, the moment he decided that, the Alpha King side of him treated choosing a gift like one of the most important decisions of his life. He considered many options and rejected almost all of them. Expensive jewelry did not feel right. Something grand would only make Avery uncomfortable. She had never cared about luxury. She cared about meaning. Then he remembered something simple. The book she once placed in his room. The small adventure story that had somehow become the first thing in years he read purely because he enjoyed it. So Damian chose a book for her. Not the rarest book. Not the most expensive. Just a story he thought would make her smile. The choice was perfect. The delivery was where things became complicated. When Avery arrived later that day, Damian handed her the book with the same serious expression he used during important ceremonies. "Avery Collins, I wanted you to have this." She accepted it carefully, then looked from the book to Damian. "Thank you." A pause. Then she smiled. "But why did that sound like you were announcing a royal decision?" Damian became completely still. "It did not. It did a little. I was simply giving you a book." Avery looked amused. "A very official book." Damian looked away, realizing she was right again. Somehow, she had a talent for doing that. But instead of making him feel criticized, Avery made him feel understood. She gently held the book and smiled. "I love it." Those 3 simple words made all his unnecessary planning worth it. "You do?" he asked before he could stop himself. Avery nodded. "Because you actually thought about what I would like. That matters more than anything else." Damian became quiet. That was something he was still learning. His entire life taught him that caring meant protecting, providing, and solving problems. Avery showed him something different. Sometimes caring was not about making everything perfect. Sometimes it was remembering a small detail, sharing a simple moment, allowing someone to see the effort behind the action. "You know," Avery said softly, You do not always have to treat kindness like a responsibility. Damian looked at her. What should I treat it as? She smiled. Just kindness. Such a simple answer. Somehow, Avery always gave him those. Damian spent years mastering the complicated parts of life. But this Omega, the one who accidentally entered his world in the most unexpected way, was teaching him the simple parts he had forgotten. Later that night, Damian looked at the abandoned rest schedule sitting on his desk and almost smiled at himself. Maybe protecting an entire kingdom was not the hardest thing he would ever do. Maybe the harder lesson was allowing himself to be happy with someone without trying to make every moment perfect. For most of his life, Damian Blackwood believed understanding someone meant knowing how to protect them. If there was a problem, he solved it. If there was a risk, he prepared for it. If someone needed him, he stood strong enough to carry whatever weight appeared. That was what made him a good Alpha King. But Avery Collins slowly showed him that caring about someone was not always about standing in front of them. Sometimes it was about standing beside them. And for the first time, Damian wanted to understand the world she came from, not as a king observing his people, but simply as himself. Avery had spent so much time entering his world. The royal wing, the meetings, the quiet chamber where everyone else saw power, but she found a person. Now Damian wanted to see hers. It started one afternoon when he found Avery helping arrange fresh flowers near one of the smaller castle halls. She looked surprised when she saw him approach. "Alpha," she asked, "do you need something?" Damian thought about the question. That was what everyone always asked him. What did he need? What problem required his attention? What responsibility was waiting? This time, the answer was different. "No," he said. "I thought I could help." Avery blinked. "Help?" "Yes." She looked at the flowers, then back at the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. "You want to help arrange flowers? Is that surprising?" Avery opened her mouth, then closed it. She was clearly trying very hard to answer respectfully. Damian noticed immediately. "You think it is surprising?" "A little," she admitted. "Why?" "Because you are looking at those flowers like they are a very serious royal assignment." Damian looked down and realized she was right. Somehow, he had been studying the arrangement with the same focus he used for important documents. "I am simply making sure it is done correctly." Avery smiled. "Damian, they are flowers. They are allowed to look happy, not organized into a strategy." He paused. The honest instinct deep within him, the part of himself that enjoyed pointing out truths he ignored, recognized the irony immediately. He had successfully turned flower arranging into another responsibility. Avery gently handed him one. "Just choose where you think it belongs." Without a plan? Without a plan. The idea sounded strangely difficult, and Avery knew it. That made her smile even more. Over the next few days, Damian started noticing more about the life Avery lived outside his chamber. She remembered everyone's names. She helped people without expecting recognition. She made ordinary moments brighter simply because that was who she was. And that was when Damian understood something important. Avery was not special because she made him feel different. She was special because she brought kindness everywhere she went. He was simply lucky enough to finally notice it. One evening, they walked through the quiet castle garden after a long day. There was no important meeting waiting, no urgent decision, just a peaceful moment beneath the evening sky. For once, Damian did not try to control it. He simply enjoyed it. "You know," Avery said, looking amused, "you have improved." Damian glanced at her. "Improved? You arranged flowers yesterday without looking like you were planning the future of the kingdom. That is a very specific improvement. A very important one." Damian smiled slightly. Months ago, a conversation like this would have been impossible. Not because people were afraid of him, but because nobody ever stepped close enough to see this side of him. Nobody except Avery. "I used to think taking care of someone meant protecting them from every problem," he admitted. Avery listened quietly. "And now?" she asked. Damian thought for a moment. "Now I think sometimes it means sharing moments with them before there is ever a problem to solve." Avery smiled. A real smile. The one he had missed. And this time, Damian allowed himself to simply appreciate it. Later that night, standing in the same chamber where everything began, Damian looked back on everything that had changed. An Omega accidentally fell asleep in his bed. She disrupted his perfect schedule. She questioned his habits. She convinced him to read adventure books and stop treating relaxation like a duty. She somehow made the strongest alpha in the kingdom nervous about choosing a simple gift. And somehow, every unexpected change became something he was grateful for. A quiet laugh escaped him as he looked toward the fireplace. "It is all her fault," Damian whispered. But now, those words carried a meaning completely different from the first time he said them. Because Avery Collins had not ruined his life. She had reminded him how to enjoy it. The Alpha King had finally learned how to let someone into his heart. But one question still remained. Could Damian Blackwood allow the entire kingdom to see what Avery had already discovered? For the first time in a long while, people outside the walls of Blackwood Castle began noticing something different about Alpha King Damian Blackwood. At first, nobody could explain exactly what had changed. He was still the same leader they trusted. Still strong. Still responsible. Still the Alpha who placed his kingdom before himself. But there was something new beneath that strength. Something warmer. The people who met him during royal gatherings noticed he listened longer before answering. The advisors who worked beside him noticed he no longer treated rest like a weakness. The servants who once only saw the distant Alpha King now sometimes saw Damian, the man who could smile at a small joke or pause long enough to enjoy a simple moment. He had not become less of a king. If anything, he had become a better one. And naturally, people became curious about the reason. Inside the castle, many already knew. They had seen the change happen slowly. They remembered the quiet royal wing before Avery Collins arrived. They remembered the Alpha King who always returned to an empty chamber and believed peace meant silence. Then they watched One Omega bring warmth into that silence without ever trying to take credit for it. Avery never saw herself that way. To her, she was simply doing what she had always done, helping where she could, caring about the people around her, making ordinary places feel a little brighter. But as Damian's world grew larger again, Avery began realizing something she had not thought about before. Their little moments were no longer just hidden inside a quiet room. The world outside was starting to notice. And the world outside came with expectations. The annual gathering at Blackwood Castle made that reality impossible to ignore. Leaders, respected families, and important members of the kingdom arrived for an evening meant to celebrate unity and tradition. The halls filled with conversations, elegant clothing, and people who had known royal customs their entire lives. Avery helped prepare everything like usual. She arranged flowers, checked details, and made sure every guest felt welcomed. It was the kind of work she loved. Yet this time, something felt different. Because across the room stood Damian. Not just Damian who laughed at her comments about stubborn books. Not just Damian who accepted a simple storybook because she wanted him to relax. Alpha King Damian Blackwood. The person an entire kingdom looked toward. Avery was proud of him. She always had been. But seeing the distance between his world and hers so clearly made a quiet thought return. Was kindness enough to stand beside someone who carried so much responsibility? It was not doubt in Damian. She trusted him more than anyone. It was doubt in herself. She wondered if staying close to him would make his already complicated life even harder. So without realizing it, Avery did what she always did when she cared about someone. She thought about what was best for them before thinking about herself. She stepped back, just a little. She focused on her duties. She stayed where she believed she was supposed to be. But Damian noticed. Of course he did. The same Alpha King who once failed to understand his own feelings had somehow learned every small detail about hers. He noticed when her smile became careful. He noticed when she stopped standing beside him and quietly moved behind everyone else. He noticed because it was Avery. Later that evening, when the noise of the gathering softened, Damian found her arranging a few decorations near the hallway. "Avery." She turned. "Yes, Alpha." Damian looked at her for a moment. "Why are you stepping back again?" The question surprised her. "I am not." Damian raised an eyebrow. Avery sighed softly. "You know me too well now, do you?" "Apparently." The smallest smile appeared on her face before fading again. "I just do not want to make things difficult for you." Damian became quiet. He understood immediately. "You think you are a problem." Avery shook her head. "No. I just know your position matters. The kingdom matters. I never want people to question you because of me." And there it was. The same Avery who worried about everyone else first. The same Avery who never understood that the kindness she gave so freely was exactly what made her special. The honest instinct deep within Damian, the part of himself that no longer needed to fight the truth, understood something clearly. Avery was not someone he needed to protect from the world. She was someone he wanted the world to truly see. because once they did, they would understand what he had discovered from the beginning. The Omega who accidentally entered his life was never valuable because she stood beside an Alpha King. She was valuable because she was Avery Collins. Damian Blackwood had spent years standing before his kingdom as the Alpha King everyone needed. Strong, certain, unshakable. But as he stood inside the gathering hall that evening, surrounded by people who respected his title, he understood something Avery Collins had taught him without even realizing it. Being strong did not mean carrying everything alone. And being a king did not mean hiding the people who brought light into his life. Avery thought stepping back would make things easier for him. She believed giving him distance was another way of protecting him. That was exactly why Damian knew he could not allow her to keep believing she was a burden. Because Avery had never been the problem. The only problem was that she still did not see herself the way he saw her. As the evening continued, Avery returned to her duties, quietly making sure everything moved smoothly. She noticed when guests needed help. She remembered small details others overlooked. She treated everyone with the same kindness, whether they were important leaders or workers preparing behind the scenes. And Damian watched as the kingdom slowly discovered what he already knew. Avery Collins did not need a title to be remarkable. During the gathering, one of the guests commented on how different the atmosphere inside Blackwood Castle felt. "There is something warmer about this place now," they said. Damian looked across the room where Avery was helping an elderly guest find a comfortable seat before returning to her work without expecting anyone to notice. But he noticed. He always noticed. "Yes," Damian answered calmly. "There is." For once, he did not hide the reason. Later, when Avery quietly moved toward the side of the room again, Damian approached her. Not dramatically, not to make a grand announcement. That was not what Avery needed. She did not need someone to place her above everyone else. She only needed someone to stop letting her place herself below them. "Walk with me," Damian said gently. Avery looked surprised. "Here." "Yes." She looked around the room. "Damian, everyone will see." He smiled slightly. "I know." That simple answer left her speechless. Because Damian was not forgetting who he was. He knew exactly who he was. And he was choosing anyway. As they walked together through the hall, people noticed. Of course they did. But what they saw was not an Alpha King ignoring tradition. They saw a leader showing respect to someone who had earned his trust. They saw the way Damian listened when Avery spoke. They saw the way she spoke honestly to him, not because she lacked respect, but because she cared enough to tell him the truth. Slowly, people began to understand. Avery had not changed Damian into someone different. She had helped reveal the person he had always been beneath the responsibility. The honest instinct deep within Damian, the part of himself that once argued with every feeling he did not understand, was completely certain now. The funny thing was, leading a kingdom had never scared him. Making difficult decisions had never stopped him. Yet somehow, admitting one kind-hearted Omega mattered to him had taken longer than almost anything else. The thought almost made him laugh. Maybe Avery was right. Sometimes he really did make simple things complicated. After the gathering ended and the castle became quiet again, Avery and Damian walked through the familiar hallway where everything between them had slowly changed. Avery looked at him. "Are you sure?" Damian already knew what she meant. She was not asking if he cared. She knew that now. She was asking if he understood everything that came with choosing her openly. Before Avery, Damian might have answered with a long explanation. He might have listed reasons, responsibilities, and carefully considered thoughts. This time, he did not need any of that. Some truths were not strategies. Some choices did not require a plan. "Yes," he said simply. Avery waited, almost expecting more. When nothing else came, she smiled. "That is it. That is it." No detailed explanation? Damian looked amused. "I am improving." Avery laughed softly. The Real laugh he had missed before. The one that reminded him exactly why all of this mattered. Damian Blackwood had spent his life learning how to be the Alpha King his kingdom needed. But Avery Collins had taught him something equally important. How to simply be Damian. And now the entire kingdom had finally seen what he discovered long ago. Avery did not belong beside him because of a title, a position, or what anyone expected. She belonged there because she was the person who saw his heart before anyone else did. But there was still one truth Damian had carried quietly. One thing his heart understood long before he found the courage to say it aloud. And soon, Avery would finally hear the words he had been showing her all along. After the gathering at Blackwood Castle, something between Damian Blackwood and Avery Collins changed again. But this time, it was not because of confusion, distance, or unspoken worries. It changed because for the first time, neither of them was trying to run from what they already knew. Avery no longer stepped backward whenever the world looked at them. Damian no longer pretended she was simply someone who happened to become important. Everyone around them had finally seen the truth that had been growing quietly from the beginning. Yet there was still one thing left unsaid. One thing Damian had shown through every action but never fully spoken. His heart had already chosen Avery long ago. He simply needed to say it. The strange part was that Damian Blackwood was not afraid. He had faced responsibilities far greater than a simple conversation. He could stand before an entire kingdom without hesitation. He could speak to hundreds of people with complete confidence. But when it came to telling one Omega exactly how much she meant to him, suddenly finding the right words became much more difficult. Avery noticed, of course. She always noticed. One evening, while they sat near the fireplace in the same chamber where their story had unexpectedly started, she watched him become unusually thoughtful. "You are planning something," she said. Damian looked at her. "Why do you think that?" "Because you have the same expression you had when you created a schedule for resting." Damian immediately understood what she meant. That schedule was organized. It had relaxing objectives. Rest is important. Avery smiled. "I agree. I just think you might be the only person who can turn relaxing into a mission." A small smile appeared on Damian's face. Months ago, nobody would have spoken to him this way. Months ago, he probably would not have known how much he needed someone who could. "You enjoy reminding me of that." "A little," Avery admitted. "Only because it reminds you that not everything needs a perfect plan." Damian became quiet because once again, she was right. The honest instinct deep within him, the part of himself he once tried so hard to ignore, did not argue anymore. It did not need to. For so long, that part of him had recognized Avery before his mind was ready to understand why. It knew the room felt warmer when she was there. It knew her laughter mattered. It knew the peaceful feeling he experienced around her was something he had spent years missing. This time, there was no need for denial. No need for excuses. No need for preparation. Only the truth. "Avery," Damian said softly. Something in his voice made her expression change. She stopped teasing and simply listened. The same way she always had. "When you first came into my life, I thought you disrupted everything." Avery smiled slightly. "I remember. My schedule. My habits. My quiet." He looked around the room. The same room that once felt complete because everything was perfectly arranged. Now he knew better. "But I was wrong." Avery looked at him. "Wrong about what?" Damian paused for a moment, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted every word to be honest. "I thought my life was peaceful before you arrived." His voice softened. "But it was not peace. It was just loneliness that I had organized well enough to ignore." Avery's smile slowly faded into something more emotional, because she knew how much it meant for Damian to admit that. "You were the first person in years who looked at me and saw someone beyond the title," he continued. "Everyone else saw what I could carry. You were the first person who wondered if it was heavy." The room became quiet except for the soft sound of the fireplace. "I do not care about you because destiny told me to. I do not care because of some expectation or responsibility." Damian looked directly at her. "I care because you are kind when nobody asks you to be. Because you bring warmth without realizing it. Because you walked into a room built for an Alpha King and somehow found Damian instead." Avery did not immediately answer. For once, even she seemed unable to find the right words. Damian smiled slightly. "That might be the first time I have surprised you." She laughed softly. "Maybe." And hearing that real laugh again reminded him exactly why everything had been worth it. The truth was finally spoken. Not as an Alpha King making a promise. Not as someone following fate because he had no choice. But as Damian Blackwood choosing Avery Collins because before anything else, before destiny, before titles, before the world understood them, his heart already had. Avery Collins had spent so long believing she was ordinary that hearing Damian Blackwood describe everything he saw in her felt almost impossible. She had never tried to change his life. She had never walked into his world expecting to become important. All she had done was care in the only way she knew how. Quietly. Honestly. Completely. But maybe that was exactly why everything changed. Sitting beside Damian, near the warm fireplace, Avery finally understood something she had struggled to accept. She did not need to become someone different to belong beside him. The man in front of her never asked her to. "You know," Avery said softly, "when I first entered this room, I thought the most surprising thing about you would be the Alpha King everyone talked about." Damian looked at her. "And was it?" She smiled. "No." A small pause passed between them. "The most surprising thing was discovering the man who took a gift book more seriously than most people take royal documents." Damian raised an eyebrow. "You are never going to let me forget that." "Probably not." And there it was again. That simple honesty. The thing he loved most about her. Avery looked around the chamber, remembering the first day she entered. The beautiful furniture. The quiet atmosphere. The feeling she could not explain. "The strange thing is," she admitted, "this place felt familiar before I even knew it was yours." Damian became quiet. Because he remembered too. The first time he found her sleeping peacefully there, he should have only felt surprise. Instead, something about her presence felt natural. Like the room had been waiting for a warmth neither of them understood yet. The scent of cedarwood, soft smoke, and leather that surrounded his space had brought Avery a sense of peace before she knew why. And the kindness in her presence had reached Damian before he was ready to admit what it meant. The honest instinct deep within him, the oldest and most truthful part of himself, had understood long before his thoughts caught up. Not because destiny forced him to care, but because sometimes destiny simply recognizes what the heart has already chosen. "I think a part of me knew," Damian said quietly. Avery looked at him. "Knew what?" He smiled softly. "That my life was about to become much less organized." She laughed. "That sounds like my fault." Damian looked at her, and the memory of those familiar words returned. How many times had he said them? At first, he used them as an excuse. A way to explain why one Omega could disturb the perfect control he spent years building. But somewhere along the way, the meaning changed. Completely. "It is all her fault," Damian said quietly. Avery blinked before realizing what he said. "What exactly is my fault this time?" There was a playful challenge in her voice. The same Avery who once talked to stubborn books and questioned whether an Alpha King remembered to rest. Damian looked around the room that no longer felt empty. "The fact that I laugh more than I used to." Avery listened. "The fact that I learned a peaceful life does not have to be a silent one." He stepped closer, his expression gentle. "The fact that I finally understand being strong does not mean never needing anyone." Avery's smile softened. This time, she accepted those words. She did not try to step back. She did not question whether she belonged. Because she finally understood what Damian had been trying to show her. They did not find each other because one was incomplete without the other. They found each other because together, they became even better versions of who they already were. "So everything is my fault?" Avery asked. Damian smiled. "Completely. That does not sound fair. You did accidentally start all of this." Avery laughed. "I was tired from working and fell asleep. In the Alpha King's bed. You are never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Probably not." And somehow, that small, ordinary moment meant more than any grand promise. Because it was real. Later that night, as they looked out over Blackwood Castle, Damian did not promise Avery a life without challenges. He respected her too much for empty promises. Instead, he promised something far more meaningful. That they would face whatever came next together. Not with Avery standing behind him. Not with Damian carrying everything alone. Side by side. The way it should have been. Their story began with an accident neither of them expected. An Omega who thought she entered the wrong place. An Alpha King who thought someone had disrupted his perfect world. But maybe, from the very beginning, destiny was not leading Avery Collins into a place she did not belong. Maybe it was guiding her toward the one place that had been waiting for her all along. Blackwood Castle did not become a different place because everything changed. It became different because the right things finally did. The tall walls still stood with the same strength they always had. The halls still carried the history of generations before them. The kingdom still looked toward Alpha King Damian Blackwood as the leader they trusted. But now, there was something inside the castle that had been missing for a very long time. Warmth. The kind that did not come from grand celebrations or beautiful decorations. The kind that came from small moments nobody planned. Laughter echoing through quiet halls. Conversations that lasted longer than necessary. A king who finally understood that a peaceful life was not supposed to feel empty. And at the center of that change was Avery Collins, though she would probably be the last person to admit it. Even after everything, Avery was still Avery. That was exactly what Damian loved most. Some people expected that standing beside the Alpha King would change her. They thought maybe she would become more distant, more formal, more focused on the attention around her. Instead, Avery continued remembering everyone's names. She still stopped to help when someone needed an extra hand. She still cared about the little things others sometimes missed. And occasionally, Damian would still find her quietly speaking to books as if they were old friends. The first time he caught her doing it again, he simply stood at the doorway watching with an amused expression. "Are you encouraging the book?" he asked. Avery turned around, completely unsurprised. "Maybe. The book does not require encouragement." She looked down at it, then back at him. This one looked like it needed support. Damian stared at her for a moment. The Alpha King who once questioned why anyone would talk to a book now simply accepted that this was part of loving Avery Collins. And somehow, that made perfect sense. Of course, Avery was not the only one who remained herself. Damian Blackwood was still Damian Blackwood. He was still responsible, still thoughtful, still the kind of leader who considered every detail. The difference was that now, someone was there to remind him when he considered too many details. That became very clear when Damian planned a simple walk through the castle gardens. Avery expected exactly that. A walk. 10 minutes outside. Maybe a conversation beneath the trees. What she discovered instead was Damian reviewing the weather conditions, the best walking path, and the estimated time for the most comfortable experience. Avery looked at the notes in his hand. Then she looked at him. "Damian." "Yes." "Is that a plan for our walk?" "It is only a basic outline. There are 3 sections." Damian looked at the paper. 4, actually. Avery tried not to laugh. She failed. "It is just a walk." "I know. Do you?" Damian was silent for a moment. The honest instinct deep within him, the same part of himself that had spent months pointing out every feeling he refused to admit, seemed almost entertained. Years ago, it pushed him to understand the truth about Avery. Now, it simply enjoyed reminding him that even after everything, he was still the same Alpha who somehow made simple things complicated. The difference was that Damian no longer fought it. He looked at Avery's smile and accepted defeat with surprising peace. "You find this amusing?" "A little." "You find many things I do amusing." "Also true." And somehow, instead of feeling challenged, Damian only felt grateful. Because Avery never laughed at who he was. She laughed because she loved every part of him, even the parts that took life too seriously. As weeks passed, the kingdom continued seeing the balance between them. Avery brought softness into Damian's world. Damian brought safety and understanding into hers. Neither one became less of themselves. Together, they simply became more. People no longer told the story of Avery Collins as the Omega who accidentally stepped into a place she should not have entered. They began seeing what Damian saw all along. Someone whose kindness was never weakness. Someone whose heart changed a castle without trying. One evening, Damian stood in the garden watching Avery talk happily with the people around her. There was a time when he believed leadership meant standing apart. Being the one everyone depended on, but never depending on anyone else. Now he knew better. Strength was not measured by how much someone carried alone. Sometimes true strength was trusting someone enough to share the weight. The quiet truth inside him already knew the answer. Avery had been changing his life from the very beginning. In fact, if Damian was being completely honest with himself, she had been winning since the first day. Since the moment he opened his chamber door and found an Omega sleeping peacefully in the one place nobody else dared to touch. He thought she had disrupted his world. But somehow, the girl who accidentally fell asleep in the Alpha King's bed became the person who finally made that place feel like home. The place where everything began looked almost exactly the same as it did on that unexpected first day. The same tall windows watched over Blackwood Castle. The same fireplace filled the room with a gentle warmth. The same carefully crafted furniture stood in the places Damian Blackwood had chosen years ago. The familiar scent of cedarwood, soft smoke, and leather still lingered in the air. Yet somehow, everything felt completely different. Because back then, the chamber belonged only to the Alpha King. Now, it belonged to Damian too. Avery Collins stood near the doorway, looking around with a quiet smile as the memories returned. It was almost unbelievable how one ordinary moment had changed everything. She entered this room thinking she was only completing a simple task. She never imagined she would accidentally fall asleep in the most forbidden place in the castle. And she definitely never imagined the owner of that room would become the person who knew her heart better than anyone. "You know," Avery said, looking toward the bed with amusement in her eyes. "All of this started because I was tired and accidentally fell asleep for a little while." Damian turned toward her. "Trust me, I remember. I was just trying to do my job. You fell asleep in the Alpha King's bed." Avery looked at him. "You are never going to let me forget that, are you?" A small smile appeared on his face. "Probably not." She shook her head, trying not to laugh. "And after that, you blamed me for everything." Damian became quiet for a moment. Not because he disagreed, because she was right. Those words had followed them from the beginning. Back then, he said them because he did not understand why she affected him so much. It was easier to blame Avery than admit that one kind-hearted Omega had walked into his perfectly controlled world and made him feel something he was not prepared for. The honest instinct deep within him, the part of himself that recognized the truth before he accepted it, had known from the very beginning. It knew the moment he stood beside that bed and saw not an intruder, but someone who somehow felt familiar. It knew every excuse he made was only hiding something much simpler. Avery Collins mattered. And now, Damian no longer needed excuses. "Actually," he said, "I still blame you." Avery blinked. "You still blame me?" "Yes. After everything? Especially after everything." She crossed her arms, but the smile on her face gave away that she was not upset. "I would love to hear this explanation." Damian stepped closer, his expression softer than the one the kingdom usually saw. This was the side only Avery knew. "It is your fault that this room is no longer silent." Avery listened. "It is your fault that I laugh more than I ever expected to. It is your fault that I learned a perfect life means nothing if there is nobody to share it with." Her playful expression slowly turned into something warmer. "That is a very strange way to blame someone." "Maybe. Anything else that is my fault?" Damian pretended to think. "The books receiving emotional support." Avery laughed. "That was necessary. The flowers that apparently do not need a strategic arrangement. They really do not. And convincing an Alpha King that a walk does not require 4 sections of preparation." Avery smiled. "That one was very important." Damian looked at her, realizing once again that this was what he loved most. Not a perfect moment, not a carefully planned future, just Avery being Avery. The person who could stand beside the Alpha King without forgetting the man behind the title. "So your final decision," Avery said, "is that everything is still my fault?" Damian nodded. "Completely. You are impossible. And somehow you still stayed." The teasing smile on Avery's face softened. "Of course I did." Because she understood what he meant. Staying was not about the castle. It was not about becoming part of a powerful world. It was about choosing each other every day, even after seeing every imperfect piece. Damian gently pulled Avery into his arms, and for a moment, neither of them needed to say anything. The same room that once represented loneliness now held the quiet happiness neither of them had been searching for, but somehow found. When Damian leaned down and kissed her, it was not because of destiny demanding anything from them. It was not because of titles, expectations, or a story written before they met. It was because after everything they experienced, they still chose each other. When they pulled apart, Avery looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "You know something?" "What?" "Technically, if you had locked your door that day, none of this would have happened." Damian went completely silent. For one of the rare moments in his life, the Alpha King had absolutely no response. Avery noticed immediately. "Did I finally win an argument?" Damian looked away slightly. "Do not make me admit this was my fault." Avery laughed. "Too late." And Damian could not help but smile, because maybe she was right. Maybe the most unexpected thing that ever happened to him was partly his fault too. Time passed, and the people of Blackwood Castle continued telling the story. Not as a story about a mistake. Not as a story about an Omega who entered the wrong room. But as the story of the day a lonely king met someone who saw beyond his crown. The day a simple accident became the beginning of something beautiful. Avery Collins never needed to become someone else to belong. Damian Blackwood never needed to carry everything alone to be strong. They simply needed to find each other. Maybe destiny really did begin with one little mistake. Maybe one unexpected moment was all it took to change two lives forever. And if anyone ever asked Damian Blackwood about the Omega who accidentally fell asleep in his bed, he would smile the same way he did every time he looked at Avery and give the only answer that ever made sense. It was all her fault, and he would not change a single thing.